Hello, good evening, and welcome. This is Science Fiction Snob, and we're here trying out a new thing on the channel. We're going to look at various books a little bit in depth, and we're going to start today with To Your Scattered Bodies Go by Philip Jose Farmer. And here with me co-hosting, I have Steve Zioki. So he is a little bit about Steve. He is he is an amateur team foosball champion from he's one part of that from 2016, and he also was hosted a movie, The Defiant Ones, on TCM, and I think he got that job because he blackmailed somebody. I believe that's what he told me in the pre-interview portion. Is that right, Steve? Did you blackmail somebody, or was there a different story there?
I just lucked into it because someone was being bullied on Facebook, and I happened to interject, and they put me on TV to host a movie. I got really lucky; just fell in my lap.
Yeah, that's a pretty big show. So you're somewhat internet famous because of that. That's right?
Uh, well, let me revert back to the foosball. That's a foosball world champion, and this
Oh,
TCM
sorry.
appearance combined still doesn't add up to what I believe Andy Warhol said we'd get 15 minutes of fame each. I don't think those like I've heard a lot of way more famous people say they had their 15 minutes, and so I'm at probably 15 seconds of fame right now.
Well, that's 15 seconds more than me. And I guess just remind me, I'll put in the description. We'll put a link to that foosball thing, that foosball championship. It's pretty well watched, and I watched it myself. It's pretty interesting. And I'm like, oh, that's how you're supposed to play the game. You're not supposed to just spin the paddles around and around like we used to do when we were a kid. You're actually supposed to aim and stuff. All right, so I learned something on that. But let's get to the book. So, Steve, you want to give us a quick 30-second summary of To Your Scattered Bodies Go?
Okay. Um, Everybody who's ever lived, including the reader, uh, at the time the books were written, um, are reborn in their perfect 25-year-old bodies. If you've lost an arm, it's back. If you had poor vision, you have good vision. And you're in your perfect bodies, but you're naked. And you're scattered along a river with everybody who's ever lived between 200,000 BC to present day, pretty much. And we get the dates later, but so that's like 36 billion people along a 10 to 20 million mile long river. Um, in kilometers, that would be 16 to 32 million kilometer long river.
For those Canadians in the audience, eh?
Yes, and we have a really, and you, so everybody famous is there, everybody not famous is there, and there's some famous people with some not famous people that band together. I don't know if you want me to spoil it yet, but they band together and journey down the river because they want answers as to who put them there and why, and they believe going up the river, pardon me, is where they'll find those answers. And it's a crazy adventure, and anything can happen because we're all there.
Yeah, it's a great. Um, my feeling that's a good synopsis. My feeling is it's a great concept for a series of novels. I mean, you could put any historical character, anyone you want in the movie or in the book. Um, you know, he gave himself Farmer gave himself lots of latitude to do whatever he wanted to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Sorry, I don't mean to. I wasn't cutting you off. I'm just saying like hallelujah. You're right.
No, no, you didn't cut me off. That's good. So let's. What we're gonna do for those of you. Well, this is our first one, so no one should know what we're gonna do. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the book chronologically at sort of the major events, and we're gonna, we'll summarize the major events a little bit, and maybe talk about them, see what we can get about each one. If you're interested in that, stick with it. We start off. The novel starts off. The opening scene is with Burton, who's the main character of the book, in this giant chamber. Steve, you want to tell us a little about that and your thoughts about it?
Okay. We don't know right away that it's Burton. I believe. I believe you actually enlightened me on that. I forget that because we were only aware of that the first time we read it, and I've read it so many times. And I just want to add to what you said that we're doing all 5 books of the Riverworld series, and this is book 1. Um, yeah, he wakes up in this chamber after dying. They show there's this. It opens up with him dying in Trieste with the wind, and he hears the bells on his camel outside his tent, and he suddenly wakes up. He thinks it's all over and it's going to fade to black forever, but he wakes up on the spit that he can't quite see along a rod with millions of others. It looks like infinity, rows of people naked like him revolving slowly on a spit, and everyone else that he sees is asleep. He's the only one awake from what he can tell. And those that have them there quickly become aware of this, I believe, and intervene. If I'm not
Well,
mistaken.
well, he tries to swim towards the ends, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
then he's able to reach. Well, actually, you should go back. He looks over and he sees somebody. He sees someone with like half their guts are out or something. They're being
Yeah.
remade, and that's actually significant because later on he recognizes who that person is. Later in the book, and it's Goring. We're gonna get to that, but he mentions that. So he
Why would,
touches. Sorry, go ahead.
did you ever figure out why they had Goring in that position for that scene?
Um, why he figures that? Well, I think it has to do with later on. Oh, let me talk about that later. I want to give it away
Sure.
just yet, but
Okay.
there's a part with Goring, and I
Come
think it
back.
has something to do with it. But I don't. I think you're right. We don't really find out, but there's sort of maybe a reason why in
Sure.
this book. But so he touches one of the rods that he's floating between, and then basically all the bodies start to fall.
Oh yeah.
And then after that starts happening, that's when the bathtub guys come after him, right? So
Yes.
like he describes and remember this book is 1971, so you know Farmer describes these guys. I guess Burton hasn't seen any flying. He's never seen an airplane. He dies in 1890 or 91, right?
Right.
And so he describes them as a bathtub, and they come over to him, and they just sort of, he screams and yells at them, and they point the rod at him, and he just, they either kill him or he goes back to sleep. I think the sort of the critical portion of this is what he yells. Yeah, I got it here. He goes, they come to her and he yells, "I'll kill, kill, kill," and then oblivion comes again, and that's the end of the first chapter. So he's obviously a little bit angry at them, and and we don't know if it's his character. Is this what motivates him through the rest of the series to, find who's done this to him or not, or is that just the kind of guy he is? He's
Yeah, he is short tempered, man.
he is, and he's also he's an explorer, right? So he's always this is perfect character. You know he's always exploring, and he wants to explore and find out what's at the end of the head of the river. So kind of a perfect character for that. All right, let's move on to that's like the first little bit, the first chapter. From then, the most to people who haven't read the book, is the most interesting part. I think he wakes up on the river, and that whole portion between he starts. It's funny. Burton he day 7 he starts planning up to build a boat to go up the river. So between day 1 and day 7, that's like it only takes him day 7 before he's like, we got to get out of here, let's go and find up the river. But I think the most interesting things to people who have never read this, how it would work, is the whole what happens between when he wakes up in the river and that first week to month. What do you want to say about that story, that portion of the story, Steve?
Well, I like you have to agree that day 7, there's no way by day 7 I'm leaving yet, right? He wanted to build huts and stuff. He made them build huts, and he wants to already split by day 7. So definitely has a crazy itch to travel, as you alluded to. And yes, that first part is.
So what about the first night? That whole they wake up and that first like how they react in that first night is kind of interesting. How Farmer thinks that would happen in this situation.
Yeah, do they try the dream gum the first night?
Yeah, so they wake up. I think he says that everybody wakes up and they just sort of like it's silent. It's eerily silent because everyone's just sort of staring at each other, and they wake up. They're all 25 years old, hairless, right?
And there was a great shout. They talk about a great shout throughout the series as well,
Yeah.
right? So they all shouted at the same time too, like in shock that they're alive, right?
Yeah, there's like a pause for a certain, some small amount of time while everyone's like touching their hair and looking at themselves and looking around and seeing like whatever thousands of people that are all naked and and then they just the great shout, right?
There's no hair. They're all bald.
Bald, hairless, completely hairless everywhere. And so yeah, the great shout, like you said, they just all start to, they scream, and then there's this wailing and gnashing of teeth, and people just basically going, crazy because they can't understand what's going on, right?
And some people are communicating because some people do speak the same language. As every area along the river has uh, two main groups of people, and then a mix of anyone from anywhere. And but at first, yes, very chaotic, very chaotic. There was some communication happening, but Burton still had to separate himself from that and walk among the trees, right? And he had to get away and just enjoy his legs. He was remarking over like that he could sprint and he could walk, and he felt great. And he walked over to some trees, some that he never recognized before, because this planet has some of the same trees and some different trees, including these iron trees, which are supposed to be like skyscrapers, and impenetrable wood.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting. Like the interesting thing about I think Burton is that he seems to be the first guy to recognize, like, to come to his senses, and he's like, these people are they're walking around, they're talking, they're looking for their loved ones, where's talking languages that nobody, some may or may not understand, but he's the first to recognize that, oh, this has happened. I better get away from these people because pretty soon they're going to be, they're going to go off the rockers more and they might become violent, right?
Absolutely, and maybe that was a calculated edge he was given by being made to wake up there. Maybe that being made to wake up there was like giving him a little bit of a heads up, and he had a slight head start on the fact that there is life after death, and it's not what most people were expecting, if they were expecting it, and obviously a surprise to those who weren't. And
Yeah.
so light edge in that capacity, and maybe it was a calculated edge, and maybe that's why he was made to wake up early.
No, that's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. So after that, this is when he starts to collect up his party, right? He's walking around. Everybody's walking around naked. He meets Monette. He meets Kaz. He meets Frigate. He meets Alice. They have the Grail stones. They kind of they figure out. I guess they figure out how those, like, it's morning, right? So there's no firing. The first Grail stone fires at noon, I believe, right? So do you want to talk about anything you want to talk about the characters that he meets and the Grail stones? Your thoughts?
Sure, and and I want your thoughts as well, of course.
Of course.
I love the choice of characters. Alice Hargraves apparently is the real life inspiration to Alice in Wonderland for Lewis Carroll.
Yep.
And Peter Jarris Frigate, has the same initials as Philip Jose Farmer, and readers quickly tuned into the fact that that's supposed to be him because Farmer loved this world so much. I believe he wanted to immerse himself in it.
he puts himself in everything, though. He puts himself in the world of tears too.
Oh,
So Yeah, it might just be his ego or something. But yeah, Frigate is definitely Farmer. I mean, he talks about later on. Frigate talks about being a writer, and he even talks about some meeting up with some guy who was a publisher who screwed him in real life, that kind of stuff. So I assume that publisher actually exists. Maybe it's not his name, but it probably exists as a way of Farmer getting back at him. But yeah, Frigate is definitely him. Go ahead.
You know what? You are in fact correct. The Riverworld was originally submitted in a contest, and he
Oh,
won.
that's right.
And that was going to be $5,000. And if you use an inflation calculator, that's equivalent to $50,000 today almost. I could be off, but it's a lot of money. It's at least 40, anyways. And
Yeah.
and for when he submitted that, he never got any of the money. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sharky is the guy's real name, or but
Sharko or something. Yeah.
Sharko, yeah, Sharko.
Yeah. No, I read the same thing too. He submitted for a thing, for a contest, and he won the contest. It was supposed to be. I thought it was 4,000, maybe it was $4 or $5,000. Anyway, at the time it was a lot of money. You're totally right. And he something happened with the company. They published another thing, but they spent the money somewhere else, and they went out of business, and they didn't have the money, so he never got the money.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe he added that in afterwards. But
Right.
but yeah, so he meets what about Monette and Kaz?
Okay, so Kaz is a Neanderthal, I believe, and he has a sloped forehead, really huge frame. Looks like he could bend loonies or silver dollars with his bare hands, and does not speak any language that Burton knows. Burton happens to be a very cunning linguist who knows 27 languages or 29 languages in real life. He actually knew, and he was considered the master swordsman, one of the greatest of his time, and obviously he didn't know Kaz's language, as Kaz had lived for who knows how many thousands of years before first recorded date in history. And but Burton, fascinated with languages, was also in heaven on Riverworld because he had access to every language, even like languages we wouldn't know existed, that were born, existed, and died away, unrecorded. So Burton's really loving that, and he does eventually get to learn Kaz's language and teaches Kaz English.
Yeah, and I think but Burton's pretty smart. Like, I think he purposefully targets Kaz. Like, he sees him and he goes, "Hey,
Oh yeah,
here's a strong guy. This will be a good guy in a fight. Things are gonna happen. I want this guy on my side."
absolutely. Yeah, you know what? Yes, I can't even think of everything. There's so many uses to him. You know what I mean? You're absolutely right. I forgot about that, but he's intimidating. He intimidates groups of men at a time and takes on groups of men at a time throughout the book. And Monette, you mentioned Monette. He is what I guess we would call an alien, because he's supposed to have come from the planet Tau Ceti, I believe.
Yeah, the Tau Ceti star. Yeah.
System. Right. Yeah, the system of Tau Ceti, or I'm not sure, but either the planet or system. And these books were written in the 70s, as you mentioned. And like as I said, it was originally a one book story, but his most recent publisher, the one that published the 5 volumes, did tell him this is too big an undertaking to try and put out in one book. And they were going to do it in 3 books, but then the 3rd book was so big, they had to make the 3rd book into 2 books. And then he just couldn't get enough of it, so he wrote a 5th book.
Yeah,
he always left himself a window open, eh? Sorry.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So, yeah, Monette is an alien. I believe he's very tall. He's got interesting, very thin and lean, but incredibly strong, and partly due to his incredible height. I believe he's 7 feet tall almost or something, and has extra long arms and weird genitals, which we know about because everyone's naked. And Burton stared. Burton happened to stare. Uh, I think he has a weird cat-like nose or something, and some kind of weird growth on either side of his nose. I never could figure out. I'd love an artist's depiction of what he actually looks like. There is one on a couple of the books, I guess, and it's interesting. He's got like a skinny mustache, skinny draping mustache, but of flesh or something going on.
I thought he had like sort of like flaps he could cover his nose, but
Okay, sure.
I don't. It's hard to. Sometimes the artists who do the book covers, they just do whatever they want, right? Like
Yeah.
they follow very roughly what the guy says. So
I
yeah,
wish there was more art. I'd buy it and hang it on my walls. I love the story so much. Or I'd like to escape into the pictures once in a while, just stand there and go there. Sorry, I didn't mean.
no, for sure. I got somebody phoning me and they won't stop calling. I'm turning the phone off. It's like 3 times in a row. I don't know what their problem is, but anyway. Um, yeah, no, Monad is critical to the rest of the story.
Oh yeah,
And we don't want to. I mean, we don't. I don't want to. I don't want to go any more into it because you don't really find out till the third or fourth book, right? What the score is, but Monad is part of Burton's group right from the beginning. That's a key item when when you get to book 4, whatever it is.
and
So
obviously it's a huge irony or coincidence that Burton gets such a rare uh, person or creature to have with him because apparently there's only 16 of them left spread out through 36 billion people. That's what we're told, at least.
yeah, it's some small number. I thought it was 30 or something like that. He makes a comment that was only about 30 of them, but yeah, 16, 30, like some small number, like a 1 in a billion chance or less of finding a person.
Right, right. And he happens to group up with, like, that's the first guy that follows him to the trees. And Monad happens to be a really wonderful person, really kind-hearted, super intelligent, like remembers everything he's ever read, and apparently has speed read everything
Yeah,
mankind's ever written.
humans have ever written.
Knowledgeable. So Burton wants him around because, well, so many obvious reasons, right?
Yeah, quite a coincidence, and you can't see it, but I'm making air quotes around the word coincidence in my right now. Yeah, big coincidence. And actually, we didn't talk about Monat first, but he is the first guy that Burton meets. He meets them all almost at the same time, but he sees Monat first, right? And he meets him first, and then the other ones, he collects the other ones. So that's like the morning. So the Grail Stones go off at noon. They go off 3 times a day, so they go off at noon, I believe. And that's when that's when there's a guy sitting on one of the top of the Grail Stones, and he gets killed, fried by it, and they go, okay, well, don't stand in there. And they find the one, the whatever, the Grail that doesn't belong to anybody, right? Like the extra one, right in the middle, and they open that up, and it has all the food in it. And that's where they learn, oh, this is how these Grail Stones, the Grails work. Maybe we should talk about. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about that. So everybody wakes up and they've got a Grail, what they call a Grail, like attached to their wrist or right beside them, and it's like a tube, kind of like a tube that you would put your like a poster in, but it's much wider, I guess, about maybe
Wide like a really wide thermos.
yeah, like a 6 inches sort of wide diameter, and like not maybe as long as your arm or so, about like that size.
Sure.
And it fits into the top of these. There's basically these mushrooms every mile, right? Every mile, every kilometer, and you put your Grail in there. The things fire up, and there's something matter energy converter in it, and it basically the big energy comes 3 times a day. Your Grail's in, you get your Grail up. Only you can open your Grail. You open it up, and it's got all kinds of food in it, enough. So you never have to work for or find food. You can just get it for free, right?
Pardon me. Yes, and you also get other items in the Grails too. You never know what kind of food you're going to get. Apparently, you get the kind of food mostly that you were accustomed to on Earth. I read that recently. I reread the books recently in preparation for this. And so apparently most of the time you can get anything in any like from anywhere. Apparently live grubs or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. There's a mention that Burton mentions later on that he got live grubs one time and he couldn't eat that. He
Yeah,
couldn't eat it.
I would have kept them in an aquarium, right? There's not a lot of animal life or anything, so
Yeah, almost none.
yeah. So there you go. Yeah, practically none aside from earthworms, different variations of earthworms, which you hardly ever see because they're in the earth, and lots of marine life in the river, thankfully.
Yeah, it's a couple big fish like what do they call them, river dragon fish, and then smaller ones as well that you can catch.
You get cigarettes, and you can, and if you don't smoke, you can save them and use them as currency. So you get cigarettes every three, like those grill stones go off for 3 meals a day, and you're getting cigarettes every time. So they're paying you money basically because that's currency
Yeah,
everywhere on the everywhere along the river. And
booze
they give you booze, marijuana, and
and
drink gum, which is like gum but LSD.
yeah,
LSD
this is a key thing. The dream gum is important.
advanced, yeah, technically advanced LSD. Go ahead, your take on it.
No, no, you're totally right. It's basically LSD, but later on, like you chew the gum and you have hallucinations and it's kind of like a way to you work through your trauma from your past. You can have hallucinations with it, yeah, just like LSD. So they eventually come to the conclusion that it might have been put there for therapeutic purposes, right?
Yeah, yeah, and some people don't need it, and it also works as currency as well because if you don't, some people are intimidated by it, some people just don't enjoy it, and some people get hooked on it and could use a methadone clinic to get off it.
Yeah.
Uh, it all depends on the person. So those people, it's you can buy stuff off them easily with Dream Gum because they're hooked on it apparently, but that would be taking advantage of their addiction, obviously.
Yeah. So lunch, people figure out how the grills work. Dinner, they obviously put their grills in, they wait, and they get all their stuff. And then what happens? What do you think would happen, eh?
Well, they were definitely celebrating. They were
Yeah.
celebrating, and yeah, having a party. It was pretty much the start of a party, like that scene in Ten Commandments when Moses takes too long coming back with the flax, right?
Yep.
Start to party really, really heavy. That's what it
So
reminds me of. That's what it reminds me of.
so the first night is like a giant orgy, right? Imagine, everybody, thousands of people, all naked, 25-year-old bodies, and all the, I guess, hormones and everything that would go with it.
Yes, unless you died as a child, 5 years or older.
Right, right. So then all these, and then you're filled, you're kind of crazy. You're filled with liquor and dream gum, and what happens?
Uh, well, apparently Burton and Alice got together,
Yeah,
right?
it's basically a big orgy. That's it's kind of interesting that because that's when the little they meet a 7-year-old girl,
Right.
Guinevere, right?
So that's the problem with this giant orgy is there are little kids all over the place too, and
Not too many, but Burton hooks up with like he sees to protect one.
absolutely. Uh, Guinevere,
Yeah, Gwen or Guinevere. Yeah,
uh, she was from some kind of Celtic region, or anyways, she had a really ancient language, and apparently she joined their group and took to Alice and Burton as parents in a
yeah,
way, and
yeah,
looked up to Burton a lot. And I want to stress that everyone wakes up in their 25-year-old bodies. Who died older than 25 years old? If you died younger than 25 years old, once you get to around what your 25-year-old body is, that's when you maintain that, and you heal quicker. You break a bone, you cut yourself, whatever it is, you heal like super fast,
yeah.
like some kind of I don't know what movie to compare it to, but you heal a broken bone, let's say 4 or 5 times quicker than you would on Earth and in your earthly life.
Yeah, they talk about someone breaking a leg and then having it well, we're gonna have to wait 5 days until so and so's back up to speed. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So
it's pretty
cool.
fast.
Cool. I gotta admit, if life came that easy, I'd just really work on my hut and relax for a while as I adapted. And I wouldn't
Yeah,
be planning my trip within 7 days.
yeah. So the rest of the time, yeah, I'm just gonna go over quick. So the rest of I mean, some of the sort of the key things that come out of that is, Alice is very, she's naked, but she's a very proper Victorian lady. So she tries to make herself some clothes, and then sort of gives up on it. They're, itchy and scratchy, and just kind of gives up. And but that's you can. It helps to enforce how stressful this would be on something. Imagine a Victorian woman waking up naked and being naked all the time and seeing this giant orgy. She might be something she
Right,
has
but
to
she
deal with.
yes, yes, she pointed out that there's no shame when everyone's in the same
Yeah,
situation.
yeah,
She talks about her figure as being good, I believe, quite early on,
yeah,
and she was quite proud of her figure nonetheless. So I think that's a bit of farmer's touch being added, though. I'm not
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, so so I guess after the first night, there's that aspect to the, Alice's character development. They start to, Burton tries to organize his little group. They start building shelters, and they do have a fight where they have to defend somebody, and defend themselves against someone attacking them. And then later on, near the end of that, we hear the Frigate. We don't even know if this is. I don't think we know if this is even true. But Frigate tells a story about the Sharko incident that you know, we referred to earlier, where he finds this guy. This guy sees him. He's like, "Hey, I know who you are," and it's like the only guy he knows. And then he punches the guy in the face. And Frigate is kind of set up to be a very kind of a passive guy who doesn't really like violence normally.
Tightens up. He tightens up and turns white. Right?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
gets all nervous. He's very nervous whenever violence is happening, but he's able to overcome that and take care of himself, right? So this is kind of, I don't know if this is like, you would think that Frigate would not be a guy that Burton would respect, right? Burton's a fighting man. He's a soldier. He respects. He doesn't want to fight necessarily, but when he does, you do it and you dispatch your enemy. And Frigate doesn't really have those characteristics, but yet he comports himself relatively well, as Burton says later on. So I think that's key too, to, as we're going to find out later. Frigate is part of the group. He wants to be part of the group. He doesn't leave the group, even though he doesn't think too highly of Burton, and he knows Burton really well, right? Like, he's studied Burton. He's one of the few people
Doesn't take him,
who
yes. It doesn't
studied
take him
Burton.
long to reveal that he did a biography on him and
That's
stuff.
right, which is kind of unusual. It'd be kind of creepy, eh? Like, think
Yeah.
you're there, and this one guy is every time you're saying something or doing something, this guy's sort of commenting, saying, "Hey, that's like when you were this, and oh, you're doing just like you did at this time." You're like, shut up, man. Like, you'd be
But then
kind
he
of
gets to quote other
pissed
people
about that.
psychoanalyzing
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
that's a better way of putting it. He basically is psychoanalyzing
And
the guy all the time.
using other people's long researched work as just matter of fact stuff rolling off his tongue. That's got to drive Burton nuts.
Yeah, it would drive anybody nuts, man. I don't know why he doesn't get, why doesn't Frigate get punched out or at least kicked off or, something. But
I believe he got in because he spoke English, though. There
yeah,
wasn't a lot of English speakers, and so that's how he weaseled his way in,
yeah.
kinda. Yeah.
But he's not useless, but he does kind of annoy Burton at times, but somehow he stays there, right? So and I think that's significant for later on. So this is kind of, we'll quickly go over the next bit. It's kind of so by day 7, Burton's already planning his boat. Which is kind of funny. He already was talking about going down the river, up the river, and finding out more stuff. And at this point, it's not because he doesn't know about the tower. He just wants to move already, right? Like he knows that there's something more going on here. That this isn't heaven. That it's technological because of his waking in the chamber. But he doesn't know yet about the ethicals that run the place, right? So he
Right.
hasn't. But he still wants to travel.
And he's managed to keep that to himself so far too.
Yeah,
About
he
what,
hasn't told anybody, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So he's already planning his boat, and so it talks about like, so I'm gonna. skip to day 20 because the day 20 is interesting. So between day 7 and day 20, Burton's organizing himself. No one is organized. These people are they're just like, I don't know, babes in the woods, naked, lying on the beach, so to speak, warming themselves, getting their 3 squares a day, splashing around in the river, right? Like, I think
Yeah,
that's basically what's going. It's like some sort of idyllic utopia, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah, let's
then
let's just stay here like this. It's
yeah,
perfect.
there's no organization, nothing, which kind of makes sense. But by day 20, day 20 is the first what they call the mini resurrections, right? And that's when they
Absolutely.
get their towels.
Yeah.
So nobody is resurrected yet. They haven't seen. All of a sudden, day 20, all these towels, their grails, they miss a meal, and their grails are filled with towels, and these towels can be magnetically connected to each other, so that basically that's their clothes, right? So that's kind of interesting that whoever set this up is like, all right, we're going to give you 3 weeks of
Nudity.
nudity, so you'll never be worried about your nudity again. It won't be such a big deal. You will get rid of that, and then now we'll give you some clothes.
Because apparently the towels are sheer. A lot of them are sheer, and some of them are not sheer. And
Yeah,
like you said, they fasten together magnetically. But they're probably because if these whoever put them there is terraforming the planets to create these planets, they're obviously advanced, so they could probably. You got to picture them being able to manipulate these towels into any type of clothes almost that they so
yeah.
choose. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, direct matter energy conversion is what Farmer talks about in the book. So they could just make a towel, however thick or whatever they wanted, any color. They mention later on you talk characters are wearing different colored towels. I don't know if that's because they dyed them somehow or if they appear that way, but
Come in different colors apparently,
yeah,
and, and uh, transparencies.
yeah. So then the book carries on. Farmer starts to skip ahead. He doesn't go sort of day to day. So after day 20, 60 days after day 20, they're launching their boat. So there's some minor things happening there. They talk. He talks about Burton has built this little group up in the hills in a safer spot, and
Oh yeah,
he's built his
because they
boat.
found grails. They found that grail stones can appear in random places, not just along the shoreline.
Yeah, they find some of them up in the hills, like in just like a weird place. And so yeah, so they talk about he's building his boat. They had to collect all this bamboo. They had to build a wall to protect it from people trying to steal it. And then they made some deal with somebody to get their huts closer to the beach so they could actually launch his boat. But Burton does say something like, well, we'll deal with the people when we do, and if they won't let us go, we'll smash their huts and just go through anyway. Damn the torpedoes, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of so it the book skips ahead. So the next thing that will happen, it's already day 416, right? And this is when Burton and his group, they've been basically they've been a year. I guess it's about a year, almost a year. They've been sailing up the river, right?
Right. Over a year. Yes.
And they
Yes.
find they're going to go through this small narrows, and they're not sure what's on the other
Almost a year.
side.
Right. Almost a year. Pardon
Yeah,
me.
and he
Because they don't launch
mentions
until 60, and it's day 416. So closing down on a year. You're right.
yeah. And so he mentions that they're going to go through these narrows. They're not sure what's on the other side. They've heard that by this time the whole world has been organized, right? So there's a lot of small states. Everybody's banded together, and there's a lot of what they call grail slavers. Do you want to talk a little bit about that's a key part of the book, grail slavery?
Yeah. Uh, in my most recent reading of the series, uh, it's really stuck with me that this potential utopia was anything but in along much of the river. At this early point of day 416, it's certainly there wasn't a lot of Grail slavery yet because it took them that long to find it, and there wasn't a lot of warring yet because army like people hadn't organized enough to build armies and stuff like that. But this area through this narrows, which opened up. This is an interesting part of Riverworld as well. They can open up into really wide lakes. It can funnel into really narrow straits where there's practically rapids. So no one in a sailboat or rowing could even attempt to go through any of these straits. So there's that problem. But they happen to be going through the straits. I guess they were going downriver. Is that right?
I thought they were going up, but he's got
Okay.
like a catamaran, right? So he's able to with a sail, and he's able to tack against the wind, eh? And that's what he's
Okay,
talks
you're
about
right. You're
doing.
right. The straits that you can't get through are way towards the end of the river. Pardon me. There is one set of straits that you can't get through with conventional craft. But yeah, most of the straits you can get through as well, and it can open up into really wide,
Yep.
very slow moving lakes as well. And that's what happens after this strait. And it's beautiful from the description. There's docks everywhere and log cabins everywhere, and it's really organized on both sides. And after a very short interlude of having passed through the straits into this open lake, which you got a picture surrounded by sheer cliffs. What we got, I don't know if we discussed the cliffs.
No, we didn't really discuss too much about how the river or the world is
You know
made.
what? Yeah,
Maybe.
we better say they are stuck within about, I'd say, on average, uh, a mile or two, an average of about a
Uh,
mile or two from the river,
yeah.
by mountains that go straight up, like so higher than Everest. They miscalculate. There's various numbers thrown up, and eventually they get a little more consistent with the numbers because they eventually have a better way of figuring it out. But yes, so you are stuck along the river. You can't go away from the river and see where that takes you because there are mountains that keep you along the river. That's how they managed to put everyone along the river and spread everyone out along the river, is basically creating this world which is like a maze but with one line all the way through, and it just zigzags all over the place on a planet we presume slightly bigger than Earth or around Earth's size,
Yeah.
and it, it circumferences it enough to be 10 million to 20 million miles long, apparently.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So they get through the like they come through the straits, and this is where I mean this is a key point of the. I think Burton makes a comment that they've been they've many people have tried to board them and steal their boat or attack them and kill them at various places down the river, but this is the first one that's successful. So they go through the straits, and waiting for them is a bunch of boats. So they have to decide: are they going to go back? Are they going to keep going? Burton says, "Let's go. We're going to keep going." And there's a giant fight scene, which would make it pretty good in the movie.
Certainly,
Battle.
yeah, it's a great battle. They almost get through, and boats launch from both sides. He really writes it well. It's a nice sunny
Yep.
day, and people are running into their boats. Some of the boats are already on the river, but everyone's being signaled to grab this boat, and so they're so outnumbered, and they almost do make it through. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. You're right. But they fail, and this is they're captured, and they're captured by a famous historical figure who's key to the novel, Hermann Goering. So Goring is one of the guys who's in charge of this little state. Him and I think some Roman emperor or Roman general is his partner in crime as this, and they take Burton and captive. They offer him to join or become a slave. Kaz decides to join. The rest of the men say, no, we're not going to join. I'm not going to, join your little group. And the women are taken. We assume to be raped and as part of their hut mates and stuff, right?
Absolutely. So um, they're it wasn't the reason they didn't join is because they were told to kill. They had Hermann Goring had imprisoned and enslaved Jews and all people from all walks of life, but he was back to making a concentration camp, and he happened to have a lot of Jews as prisoners, and he had asked Burton and Frigate and Monette to join or not, and by joining, they would have had to just in cold blood murdered one of the prisoners right in front of them, right, just to
Yeah.
prove loyalty.
Who they
And
said he was a Jew. I
Um,
think.
I'm sorry.
They said that you got to murder this prisoner, and
Oh
they
yeah,
said he was a Jew.
right, right, right. And I guess Kaz really did not want to be a slave, and when they got to him, he killed the guy and joined.
Yeah, yeah.
And they all became prisoners in this camp, and that meant that they were still allowed. Only they can open their grail because these things are so sensitive that they can tell the DNA or something like that, or
Right.
some kind of fingerprint, and so they're forced to open their grail under duress, and and only given enough to survive, and everything else is taken. The cigarettes, everything else is taken, and as you know, it's all wealth, so they become more powerful. And so grail slavers take all of the wealth and half the food or more out of the grails 3 times a day.
Yeah.
That's what grail slavers do.
Yeah, so this is
But
the basis of of what life is going to be like on the Riverworld, right? Like, I mean, some states might be groups of people might not do this, but a lot of them are going to go back to their old things, and they're just going to keep these slaves, keep them barely alive, and take their food and gum and cigarettes and booze and whatever else good comes out of there, right? So,
and there and Loga, no, sorry, not Loga. Log who? Logu. Who's Frigate's girlfriend? What's Frigate's
yeah, that's her
girlfriend?
name. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
Logu.
Loga is very close to the same name, but Logu or something. And Alice, and the fact that they get, they being a prisoner there means for sure being raped and used at other people's will. And so in their earthly life, this means that many people in their earthly life don't have to suffer such atrocities. And already within a year on the Riverworld, which had potential to be uh, more so a paradise than Earth because of the free ride in some capacities, maybe not in every capacity, but with such huge potential, as you said, it's already showing what life's going to be like, and it disturbed me the most in my most recent. I've gone the longest without having reread it or re-listened to it again during this last time, and yeah, it's really disappointing, but perhaps realistic in some capacities too, because that's the way people are.
Yeah, no, it is. We're not doing too well as humans right off the bat, slaving every people, and they're not doing too great. But yeah, you make a good point. I mean, we're kind of looking at it from our modern perspective, but the vast majority of the people on the Riverworld are not, going to be modern 20th century types like us. So they're going to, perfectly good to capture your enemies and kill them and enslave them and that sort of stuff. Um, yeah, great point. So we're not. I'm not going to go over this, in too much detail. I mean, you got to read the book. They said, but it's another good scene. Burton is a slave for a while. They plan a revolt. They actually do revolt, and Burton. I can't remember the name of it, but Burton built. Once they kick out the Grail slavers, they start their own little state. But about 30 days after their revolt and they've kind of set up their own little state, Burton is coming back, I think, from like a little trip upriver or something, and
Yes.
he comes back and he like comes into the from the river, and he's like, hey, where are the guards, what's going on? And he finds that everyone is asleep.
Yes.
So you want to take it from there?
Um, well, I believe he felt that those who created the planet made everyone in the vicinity fall asleep because they were looking for him. He's the guy that woke up in the chamber, and for some reason he felt that he always had this thing about those who. Do we want to say the name of those who created the planet?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the ethicals.
Now's a good time to bring them up.
Yes, yes, the ethicals are the name of the breed or race that created the planet and this whole resurrection thing. And he always feels as though somehow he violated something by waking up, and that there's unfinished business with him, and he feels as though they're after him, and
Yeah.
so he I believe he opens up more about what happened to him then to try to get help to weed out any potential ethicals, and they go looking for potential ethicals. If I'm
Yeah.
not,
Yeah. There's a. So I didn't sort of mention this. So there's a part about this time, like Kaz, who Burton notices a symbol on somebody's symbol on someone's forehead, and there's this guy called Spruce, right?
yes,
So like he mentions it. Hey, he's got a symbol on his forehead, and so they're
no,
like, what's this about? They capture Spruce, torture him, and this is where they get a lot of exposition about what's going on the Riverworld, right? So this is where
yeah,
we first find out the story, and the story being, go ahead. What's the story?
um, that that they've all been put there. Actually, he doesn't. I don't think he reveals too much. I think he tries to mislead Burton. I think he.
Well, we don't know if he's misleading or not. Like but he tells the story that you've been put here,
Yeah,
by us, and you're supposed to, develop yourself and become a better people so that you can, your soul can go on or whatever, right?
but he seems hesitant to even tell them that, right? He seems pretty hesitant
Yeah,
to. They force that part out of him somewhat, and he doesn't really get into too much detail. He says it could hinder your journey, and then they have to ask him to elaborate. What does that
yeah.
mean?
When
So
they say they're going to torture him, he says, "Oh, if you torture him, it hinders your journey." And then, yeah, he explains that whole thing. Yeah, yeah. No, you're right.
so at this point, they learned they get some clues about why they're there, and but nothing concrete. And Monat, in fact, because he's a very calm individual and people take to him very well because he just apparently exudes love for his fellow creature, and he's doing the interrogating and getting answers, and eventually, when Burton's not satisfied with the answers, because a lot of what he's saying they already know, they're already there, and they already know that someone put them there, and Spruce doesn't really. He basically takes a cyanide pill, but in some technologically advanced way
Yeah,
with something with the power that they've given him
yeah.
with
They
an implant.
yeah. There's some implant in their brain. They do a autopsy on Spruce later, and they find this little black ball in her brain, and basically you can think yourself to death. It's like basically a suicide pill. You're right, but there's a couple of suspicious things about this. And Spruce could have thought himself dead at any time. Why does he wait to you know
Because he said that he fears pain, so I think he was afraid to. I, I, I think
but they only threaten to torture him, but they don't actually torture him. He answers some of their questions, and at some point he decides to think himself, like, he's like, all right, that's enough, and he thinks himself to death. And Monette is asking him these leading questions too. Like, you'd never get away with that as a lawyer. He asks these leading questions of Spruce, and so it's kind of somewhat suspicious. Like, we don't we don't know anything, but it's like, a little bit fishy, the whole thing. Why not kill himself right away when he's captured? You
you're
know,
right. Yes, he could have done so. He could have done so.
and these things are important later. But everyone's asleep, and um, I guess correct me if I'm wrong. So they Burton decides to run. He decides to take off. Is that
I
right? I can't.
think you're right. I think is that when he
He,
started?
I
Did
think
he?
he kills himself, doesn't he? He just, like, he figures
Yeah,
everyone's asleep, they're coming after him. So the part we talked about, Spruce, happens before he comes. Like, that actually happens after the revolt. It doesn't happen. Um, you know, Burton deals with Spruce. They know something's up. They find out they get some exposition there. Then, Burton comes back from his little trip, 30 days from the revolt. Everyone's asleep, and Burton decides to run and kill himself. And this is kind of, he doesn't call it that yet, but it's kind of the start of the Suicide Express, sort of.
Yeah.
Um, and the funny thing is that Burton wakes up in this uh, along the river in this state called Severia, I believe it's called. And the interesting thing is that Goring is there.
Yeah, so he hasn't started the Suicide Express yet because I believe Alice was still with him at this point.
I think he does. I think he does commit suicide to get to Severia, but it's not really Suicide Express is when he decides that he's going to do this normally. But he does try to kill himself to get away from everyone being asleep, I believe. I could be wrong, but he wakes up in Goring has been dead for whatever 30 days, but he wakes up in this state where which is no grail slavery, pretty nice. But Goring happens to be there, and I think they say that Goring's been there. He's kind of crazy. He's been chewing dream gum. He's kind of out of it. The whole thing.
Yes.
But he what are the chances of him dying and arriving in the same place that Goring does? Like, that's pretty slim, right?
Right. Again, same kind of numbers, 36 billion to 1 kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we saw, like you mentioned, we saw that Burton then realizes that Goring is the one he saw. I believe when he runs into Goring this time, Goring's having fits and withdrawals and bouts of trouble with dream gum, I believe.
Yeah.
He was doing it on the dream gum and having severe issues with that. And does Goring die in that scene?
Yeah, he died. So, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly, so what happens is that, this kind of shows us what a good state acts like. Because Burton shows up, they say, "Hey, you can be part of our group," and they kind of come into. He's there for a couple days, a couple weeks, um, working with the state. It sort of shows us how the normal states, as opposed to the Grail states, work, where you have to, you got to do some time working on your, practicing, your weapons work in order to defend the state against various other people. You got to work a little, spend a couple hours working, building walls, that kind of stuff, sort of civic improvement stuff. So it kind of shows us how a state is there. And he sees, by this time, Burton is, afraid that the ethicals are after him. So he's going by a false name. So having Goring there, I think he threatens Goring. He says, "I'll kill, keep your mouth shut. Don't say my real name or I'll kill you." I'm trying to keep quiet. But, Goring has his own problems. And I think this is when, Goring chews dream gum. Oh, no, this isn't the time. Sorry. But somehow, I don't remember how, somehow Goring dies. And, a few weeks after Burton arrives in Severia, that's when he first meets X. Right?
Yes.
You want to talk about this is an important part of the book. This kind of another big piece of exposition with Farmer.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens is Burton is, I believe, lying in bed already, and a visitor comes to his hut, and Burton finds himself unable to move. Maybe Burton was asleep and woken up. I believe Burton was asleep and woken up by X at his side, and but Burton couldn't react. Like Burton would find that someone uninvited coming into his hut while he's sleeping, he would react. He would jump up and do something about it.
He's paralyzed or something. He can't move.
Right, he can't move, and X has this. X is silhouetted in the dark. X doesn't want to reveal himself at all and give away any clues as to what his identity might be, and has some kind of like a bulbous thing on his head. And so, and Burton knew that headpiece he wore was not of this Riverworld, and he knew that this was one of the ethicals. And the guy introduced himself as such, and he became Mr. X, or X to Burton, the mysterious stranger, because never revealed his name. And he basically told Burton that the ethicals who created the world and are just doing an experiment and are just studying reactions, and they don't actually have ethical reasons to be doing this. And he doesn't want to reveal too much more about that, and he's kind of secretive about what his mission is and what his intentions are. But he's basically telling Burton that he's got someone in his corner, and he needs to hide and not let himself be captured. And I believe, and Burton's taken all this in stride pretty good. He was awoken in that chamber, and I believe at this point the mysterious stranger tells him that he was responsible for that, and Burton takes it all very well, and probably enjoys being updated. And once he became mobile again, I believe it was shortly thereafter that he had no choice but to start the Suicide Express, because in fact X cut off the conversation, sensing that they were onto him, and he needed to get out of there, and that Burton would likely need to get out of there.
Yeah.
And if you want to take over.
No, for sure. You're right. So like X says that, basically says that the whole thing's an experiment, right?
Yes.
They want to study all these earthly languages that they've never seen before, and they want to see what happens when you mix all these people from different times together. So it's all a big joke, and then at some point they're gonna just basically wipe them out and stop the experiment, right? So of course that's not gonna make Burton very happy. And you're right. The X says that they're closing in on me and on you. Take this pill. It's a suicide pill, and kill yourself. That's the only way you can get away with them. And you're right. And you're exactly right. It's the start of the Suicide Express. This is where Burton figures out I can just escape them by just killing myself again. So, do you want to take the next part? Burton wakes up. Where and who is with him again?
I believe it was the last Grailstone. He could see, apparently, the top of the river, going against the river. There's a Grailstone, and then another 25,000 miles before the river runs into a tunnel and you can't follow it anymore. And he was at the last Grailstone, and who else but Herman Goring, who kept popping up actually several times with him. And as you mentioned, he was right next to him when he woke up in that chamber. So maybe he was trying to figure out maybe something to do with the proximity of them there, makes the computer throw them together wherever they go. Maybe there's some kind of weird connection, but he doesn't like the fact that he's connected to Goring, as Goring was a despicable human.
Yeah, he doesn't like Goring. He's heard about, since then, Burton's heard about Hitler, and he's heard about Goring. He doesn't like the guy. He doesn't like him anyway. He's a scumbag. But he keeps seeming to wake up with him. So so they wake up, like you said, but the last of the Grailstones, and the significant thing is that there's these sort of pre-man giants, like 9 feet, 8, 9+ feet tall, basically Joe Miller, which we're going to meet later in the next book. But and they're all basically bashing each other's skulls in, right?
Yeah, and these aren't just really tall guys like basketball players with some musculature. They're apparently 700 and 800 pounds as well, and massive, like built like the Incredible Hulk would likely, but with this comical nose, big proboscis, and and very hirsute.
Yeah, hairy your
Yeah,
suit. Yeah, definitely.
yeah, yeah. They're prehistoric. It's an interesting prehistoric creation, but apparently there are some questions in science about that kind of thing being a reality, and I'm sure there was then, and so Farmer incorporated it in his story.
Yeah. So these giants, I mean, Burton can't speak with them or anything, but they're basically, I guess this is kind of like Valhalla for them, right? So they basically eat all they want, and they get to fight all day and kill each other, and then wake up the next day and fight with each other. They don't have anything else to do, and have sex too, I suppose, with the women as well. But this is kind of their sort of key thing. So, they're not very civilized. So, Burton and Goring show up, and they're more than happy to, you know, I believe I don't think they actually. Well, one tries to kill Burton, but he already gets injured. Like he gets injured from somebody swinging a club around. They don't really take care to not hurt these guys, right? So they happen to get injured, and they'll just So they both, Goring and Burton, both get smashed again,
Yeah,
and they wake up again. I can't remember exactly where they wake up, but they wake up in some other state, and again, Goring is right beside him. So this is a couple times in a row. So it's getting really, really weird because no one's ever um, knows about this. But this is, Goring kind of. This is when he kind of, I guess, goes crazy in a sense. He starts dreaming. He starts chewing dream gum extensively. And at one point, Burton kind of feels bad for him, and he's the only guy he knows, so he looks after him. Goring like goes in some sort of coma, and Burton tries to look after him. He tries to feed him, but like 10 days later, Goring dies. He just and right before he dies, he like sits up and screams, and then just dies. So Burton tries to help him out, but he's just too far gone and everything. So, and this is when the book kind of skips ahead. Burton stays there for about 3 months, and then he really starts the Suicide Express. And the book skips over any adventures or anything during this time, and basically says that this goes on for 7 years, and Burton has, by his count, has killed himself 777 times. So that's kind of really,
morbid.
really, yeah, morbid. And just, yeah, like imagine doing that to yourself, how dedicated he is. And just, what the heck? Like, this is what's been going on. 7 years have passed.
Yeah, so that's chaotic. He's not able to organize at all. He's basically on the run, wondering how is X keeping track of where he is. We do find out later how the mysterious stranger has been doing that, but
Or how the ethicals are tracking him. He doesn't really know that either, right? Like he's running from them too.
right. So he has no time to set up and devise a plan when he's just popping up in random parts of this world, and uh, and so that must be that's 7 years of pretty chaotic time for him, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's pretty it's pretty grim, and it's interesting. They depicted flying machines. Even when he's diving down into the river to drown himself, the flying machines will pursue him. And
The bathtubs.
one of yeah, actually one of well, they have all sorts of flying machines. They have massive flying machines and different ones, right? The
Yep.
ethicals do, and one of them did actually chase him down into the river and capture him. Correct?
Well, yeah, but not well, yeah, not quite yet though. But it's still like there's one other key thing. So after the book just sort of it kind of just Farmer kind of glosses over the 7 years. 7 years have passed, and he's killed himself this many times, and then he wakes up near the North Pole, about 25,000 miles from the North Pole. And who does he meet again?
Herman Goring.
Goring. But this time, this is a place where there's a lot of like Northern Europeans living there, and more modern, modern 17th century higher sort of thing. And this is he meets Goring again, and this is where like the where we first hear of the Church of the Second Chance.
Uh, Right, but we don't know much about it other than they have a spiral dragonfish bone as a symbol, and that they're peaceful. They're a nice, peaceful type religion that believe, uh,
They're pacifists for sure. They don't fight.
and they believe in ethicals. That ethicals put them there, and they don't get into as much detail in this first book about the church, but I
But
guess I guess that's. I don't. Does Goring join them yet? I think he does then,
yeah,
right?
he's yeah. I think he's been with them for a while. Like they say that he's been there for 2 years, and now he's like sorted himself out, so to speak, right? Like he's sort of found his way there. Burton's been, it's been 7 years basically since he's seen Goring, but now Goring has been there for 2 years, and he's been, I don't know if at least a priest of the church. Yeah, they talk about the church a little bit. They say that they don't nobody knows who the founder was. They just call him the founder, and that there's been times on the river where people are resurrected and wake up, but they don't wake up. They're not. The body appears, but they're not. There's no soul in the body, so to speak, right? They don't get up. They're not conscious. The body is resurrected but dead, right? And so this is the start of the religion where they're saying, we need to improve ourselves ethically, and if we do, at some point we will go on and we will no longer be resurrected. Our soul will move on to something else, right?
When we discussed the towels, I'm not sure we discussed like the reason Burton can do this Suicide Express is you do pop up the next day, fresh with a grail, uh,
And
naked,
yeah,
and on a random part of the planet. I'm not sure we got into resurrections,
uh,
the many
well,
resurrections.
yeah, well, that's okay. Good point. You're
But
right.
but
They may,
that's how
and
I covered it there.
yeah, and you get a couple towels too. Like you get a couple free towels too. Just like
Yeah,
it's like a really nice hotel. Couple free towels.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, so this is when yeah, so Burton, he's really close to the North Pole. It's colder. He knows it, and he sort of questions the guys of the church. There, he talks about getting up and on the river and going up there, and they basically, I mean, they're not interested in that, right? And they tell him, yeah, lots of people have come and they've tried to get up there, but we're peaceful. We're just trying to, if you want to go, you can go, but you should be fixing yourself ethically, right? Like that's their kind of thing. And this is like a big, I don't know if this is the base of the Church of Second Chance, but it's kind of a big, they kind of control the area in a sense, right?
Yes, and I believe they're under the impression that there is a time limit. You do have to try to keep advancing ethically and getting to a state of going on to the next stage of life. Apparently, there's some next stage of life that you get to attain only with ethical advancement. And I
Yeah,
guess it,
that's not really explained, right? Like I always assumed it was, you would be absorbed into some sort of godhead, but they don't really, that's just my own thought. They don't really say anything, right? They imply that your soul has sort of gone on, but we don't know where, right?
right, absolutely, and so. Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Sorry, I broke your train of thought. But this is like, so we're basically at the end of the book here, and then this is when Burton is captured by the council. So you want to go on with that a bit?
I believe I don't remember what made him run. Uh, I think someone was spying on him, and he tracked down the person who was spying on him and killed him, and found a photograph of himself on the guy.
Right, right.
And this photograph was from 1850, and it was let's say it was like a highly digital quality photograph in color from an angle that there's no way anyone was there taking his picture. He
Yeah,
remembers where that was and what time in his life that was, and he was not getting his picture taken, which took a long time. He had to pose
yep,
and stay still for a long time to get a picture taken. And this was clearly a picture taken while he's in motion in some circumstance or another back in 1850. So the spy ethical spy could recognize him, and he was just using it as a tool to recognize Burton and find him.
Yeah.
And they even doctored the photo, I believe, so he wouldn't have any facial hair.
Yeah,
From
yeah. And he had a mustache when he was. Yeah, I think it said something about he's like a 27-year-old lieutenant in the British Army, and knows he had a mustache. He was in some backwater country fighting and doing stuff, and yeah, like it's just like he's like, this impossible that never happened. How do they do this? It kind of shows them it scares them a little with their power, right?
Absolutely, and I think he sees. Um, I think he sees movement in the sky, and I think he sees one of the ships, and he runs. And this was shortly after he killed the spy.
But he
And
doesn't make it.
right, right. He dives down deep to drown himself, and it would have been his 778th time. And and apparently they caught him. They dove down after him into the water and captured him. And again, he's waking up from because it moves from then to him regaining consciousness in a room with a table and a council of 12, I believe, in
Yeah.
front of him.
Yeah, so this is the big climax of the book, right? So this is the big reveal, right? He's been captured by these ethicals, and now they're gonna interrogate him and whatever. So you wanna keep going?
Um, well, you know what? I'm compelled to wonder. When we talk about it, instead of trying to organize my thoughts and say something on the matter, it just makes me think. These moments in the book and these segments make me think quite a bit. So they question him, they interrogate him because they want to find out who the traitor is,
Yes.
and he in turn is trying to question them, even though they're telling him they're going to wipe out his memory. So stop asking us questions. You're not going to remember our answers, even if we told you, right? Because we're
Yeah.
just
Yep.
going to your mind. So stop asking us. We're trying to get to the bottom of who X is and who the mysterious stranger is. So now Burton realizes this X and mysterious stranger is a rebel and a renegade for sure, and he's on his side. And he has no intention of being this guy's friend because these people might actually be ethicals. But if he can use X to his advantage, he's finding out now that he can. But he's really pissed off that they want to wipe
Yeah.
out his memory, and they plan to wipe out his memory, and he's calling it violence, and he's saying, why did you force this life on me? And he's throwing out some interesting questions.
Yeah.
But
There's a key thing that I think needs to be mentioned. They talk about unwinding his memory and finding out who he is, and he says, "Well, why didn't you do that and figure it out? Why am I here talking to you guys? Why didn't you just do that?" And they say, "Well, we tried to do it, and we couldn't find anything. The guy masked himself too well, right?" And then he says, I think Burton says something like, "Well, why don't you guys just, unwind all your memories and everybody else's, if someone's helping me, he's an ethical. Why don't you unwind our memories, all your own memories and find out who it was?" And they say, "We did, and we didn't find anything, right?" So that's
which
when, go ahead.
That's incredible writing too for very early 70s, late 60s, because that's like those are computer concepts that I wouldn't have given them credit for being able to write about back then. But apparently they were they were more advanced than I like to give credit to. So I'm just pointing out how state of the art that kind of writing was, in my opinion, for
Yeah.
that time.
Well, we both love Farmer. I mean, we won't deny that. He's great. Yeah, 1971. Yeah, so it's a great. I mean, I think this is when Burton assumes that. I think he assumes that one of the 12 that he's looking at must be the ones helping him, because whoever was able to prevent their own memory from, like, hide their own memory from being read, or trick whatever technology, must be pretty powerful. So he starts, if I remember correctly, he starts looking at the looking at the council people, we get a bit of a description of them. We get a description of Loga, um, who's sort of the main person who's interrogating him. We get a, a description of I think a blonde white woman who sort of sits beside Loga, and he assumes that is Loga's wife, and she's questioning him a lot too. And he starts to try to look and say, oh, which one of them is X? I mean, not that he figures it out, but
Yeah.
he
So he's
starts
trying.
he starts thinking that way, right?
Yeah.
And I believe we get a description of Thanaber, right? Who's introduced, his name Thanaber, and he's the guy with the jewel in his eye, right? We don't know what that does.
Right. Right. There's a big jewel instead of a glass eye. He's got some kind of fancy jewel in his eye. Yes.
And then they question him. Is there anything else you wanted to? I was going to wrap that part up. Is there anything else you wanted to say about? Do we cover everything about the council and stuff?
I believe so. I believe those were key points. I'm glad you mentioned that. So yeah, I think we covered it.
So they basically, I think, if I remember correctly, Loga basically ends the interview. He says, that's it. You won't remember any of this. You're gonna wake up on the river. You're done. See you later. And they point a rod at him again, and he goes to sleep. And he wakes up, but he does remember, right?
He does remember. So what he realizes is, wow, whoever X is, this guy is pretty good, and I'm glad I remember. He wants to remember. He doesn't want to be violated of his memory. Anyways, he does.
And
And
I think that further proves to him that X is probably one of the council. I think that he kind of suspects that, like, and he wakes up. He's resurrected. Nearby, he finds Frigate and Alice there.
unbelievable. And Monette, yeah, and
Yeah, his
Kaz.
group.
They're all still together. Those four are still together.
Kaz too, I believe, is with them, right?
Yeah, and Log who?
Frigate's girlfriend.
Yes, and but that's the main group. And I believe Kaz already has Bess at this point. No, or does he?
I think he does. Yeah.
Yeah. So
We're also told that. Well, we didn't mention this when he was talking to X, but back when he meets X and first talks to him, X mentions that there's 12 people. There are 12. There's like 11 others other than Burton that have been recruited, to prevent what's
yeah, he's
happening.
kind of dream team to get his work
Yeah.
done. And so not only is Burton going to be grateful that his memory was not wiped clean and like have a reason to have some allegiance to X, and I'm sure some gratitude. X not only does that, but like you said, puts him back to his family and the crew he really cares about. And what a thing after such a long hiatus away from them to be reunited. They were all in tears, and it's like a joyous occasion. And in that world with all the suicides and slavery and rape and whatever, it's nice to have that happy moment. It's a really great moment, and X comes off as quite a good guy by setting Burton up to reunite with them.
Yeah. So I'm going to read the last, and this is the last couple lines of the book here. So yeah, that's exactly what happens. Frigate said, "What do you plan on doing, Dick?" And he replies, "I'm going to build a boat and sail up the river. All the way? Want to come along?" And that's how Farmer ends the book. So, to be continued. Sort of a classic movie ending for the next book.
Most recent Star Wars movie in the saga ends that way. There's only a few of them left. They're in a spaceship, and who knows where they're off to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
What happens from here? And I love that kind of ending. Yeah, it makes you like angry that the next book's not out yet if it isn't.
Yeah. And that's how it ends. That's To Your Scattered Bodies Go. So we want to talk about this. We want to mention. So that kind of ends our discussion of the book. But there are, at the end of each discussion, we want to talk a little bit about, sort of like a question about the series or a book that we want the listener here to consider. So for this one, We were talking, and Steve, we thought we'd look at what are your thoughts on your your second reading. So some books you read the first time and they're really good. You read them a second time, they're not as good. Some of them are way better. Um, I mean, we've both read this series a bunch of times, but we both read the book again in preparation for this. So, what are your thoughts on this? Your however umpteenth reading. What do you think about it? About the book from what you remember versus having it fresh in your mind.
Um, well, it's no less a form of escapism. I love that. That's what I loved about them. It was a great escape. That's why I liked going a few years in between too. So it was a little fresh again. I don't have the best memory, so that affords me to enjoy it more the next time as well. Um, yeah, so I I love everything about the story. Um, I do have to admit, we were talking about it. I've read reviews for the book for for years because I was buying some signed editions, and I have a whole shelf dedicated to this series. It's my favorite series, I'll admit, and that's why we met through YouTube, and we're having this discussion now, in fact. And so, having read reviews, because I love getting other people's takes on it, I used to see a lot of stuff about how the book is sexist and Farmer is sexist, and a couple things about racism. And I used to get defensive and try to defend the book with that, against those comments, saying that Farmer is not giving his own opinion. He's always writing from the perspective of a character, and he switches off to other characters. There is some neutrality, but he doesn't offer any kind of opinion on anything when he's writing from a neutral perspective, which is rare. He's usually writing from Burton's perspective in this book, other characters in other books. It's spread out evenly among among the third and fourth book. I believe he switches off to many people, taking their perspective. And some of them are anti-racist and anti-sexist, and some of them are sexist. And
Yeah, just interrupt for a sec. I think
sure.
that is a really great point, and I think that even if you don't think that if you read this book and you don't agree with Steve's point on that, when you read the other books, you'll see him write from a bunch of different perspectives, and it really reinforces what you're saying right now when you read those other characters. So you're definitely correct about that aspect of it. Yeah, go ahead.
uh, yes, right on. And and I see a lot of that in any form of art, even music. I'm changing the words to music that sometimes I'll change a line, because in today's world, political correctness has changed things and has changed our sensibilities. And we have to consider the sensibilities of the past sometimes if we're going to try to enjoy art from the past. And that doesn't mean agreeing with anything, but maybe having a bit of leniency. But I don't particularly believe Farmer was intentionally sexist. I think he was a horny guy because he wrote about space sex and other books and stuff. So I think his his love of women and writing about sex can sometimes make his writing and his viewpoints come off as though he has less respect than he should. But I find that the women are the heroes in this series. And from my perspective, the women are as much the heroes as the men, and I'd give them a slight edge, like in the grand scheme of things. So I don't think his intention was to be sexist, but I believe due to the sensibilities at the time and a lot of the character perspectives he's taken, it's easy for someone now, and I'm more sympathetic to those criticisms now, because times have changed certainly, and we do have to be more, and we do tend to be more sensitive now because of that. And so I found reading this maybe made me think of some of these reviews and say, well, maybe they were right, and I see why they were saying that. But so I was more sympathetic to that stuff, but I still didn't enjoy it any less. I really do enjoy the adventure. I love adventure stories, and I did find it more morbid. Certainly find it. I don't know how I was so desensitized to all the death and everything else
Yeah.
first few times, but So it is a little more morbid than I remembered, and I guess it's not as politically correct as we've all come to accept. Like sometimes there are fanatics in terms of political correctness, but we've all come to grow in that direction, which is a good thing. And in terms of that general consensus we all have in today's world, um, there are times you raise an eyebrow here and there, but I think they're beautiful. I think they're beautiful works of art.
Yeah, yeah. My thoughts are kind of similar. I mean, it's written in 1971. Like, let's not, take our own sense
Published.
of,
He
yeah,
had,
you're
yeah.
right.
So he's been
Published
writing.
in 71.
He's been writing it over and over for a couple of decades by that point. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's published in 71. To take our own views and say, oh, the women are being, like, oh, how come the women are being taken and raped or something like that? Well, of course. I mean, and remember, the people that he's dealing with in this series are not from the 20th century per se, and most of them are, they're 7th century, or whatever, back in, before Christ. I mean, that's what these people would do, right? Like, they conquer other people and you take them as slaves and rape the women. That would, I mean, they're acting in their own. I think Farmer's very authentic in that. They're acting how they would be acting, whether or not it's right or wrong. I mean, this is probably what would likely happen. So yeah, I think those criticisms are that's kind of you know criticize him for being sexist. I mean, you can if you want, but it's a story. He's writing a story about what might happen in this situation. And I think it's um, pretty spot on for most of it, how humans would most likely react, at least at the beginning anyway, right? And hopefully we'll get better as the series goes on, right? We'll become more civilized, which I think we might see that. But yeah, this is your favorite series. I can't say that it's not. It's one of my favorite series. I've got a couple favorites, but it's definitely up there. On the second reading, I actually, I've read it a bunch of times, but I haven't read it recently, and it's got to be at least 10 years, maybe more, maybe 10, 15, 20 years it's been since I've actually sat down and read the thing, and I found myself enjoying it more than I remember. I like the fact. I like when Farmer, jumps around. Some of these things might be jarring where you go, and then 7 years pass, and I've killed myself 777 times. But I like that he focuses on key points of the story, and tells it how he wants to tell it. Focusing there. His description of the states, and he seems to put a lot of thought into how we might react in that situation, humans, and then how our that society would evolve from everyone just sort of doing whatever, then needing to get together to protect themselves in small little groups, and then larger states, and then some of those states being taken over by people who crave power, like Goring, or these various other Hitler, any of these people from in history would go
So,
together and to do crappy things to other people, put them enslave them or whatever. Yeah, it's a great story. I totally recommend it to anybody. It's awesome. Anything
yeah.
you want to add there?
You know what? Because you waited so long, that's why you enjoyed it as much. I believe the longer I wait, the more I enjoy it to reread it. So yeah, I agree with you 100% on all your points, and uh, I agree. It's great, and I recommend it as well.
All right. Any final thoughts before we end it off?
Well, I had a good time. I'm going to try to be a little more fluent and better prepared for the next one, but I look forward to it because the story gets better, in my opinion. A lot of people prefer book one, and a lot of people say, because I've read so many reviews, a lot of people say book one's the best, or book one and two combined is the best. But I think my favorites are three and four, and I can't choose between them. And but one, two, and five are all good as well. So this should be fun if we're going to do all five books.
Yeah, yeah. All right, that's great. Yeah, I I like all the books for different reasons. I kind of really like 4 because of the great battle scene, but they're all good in their own way. Like there's different aspects of it. But you know, 2 is good too. I'm looking forward to all of them.
Oh yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah,
there's and they're kind of different. Each book is a little bit different. You know, like the next Fabulous Riverboat focuses on Mark Twain more, and then the third one goes back to Burton, and then there's some so you don't get different new characters being thrown in the dark design. So yeah.
yeah.
All right, so we're gonna end it off here. Let us know, what you think of this video. What you thought of the book. Is our did you gain something from our discussion? Is it too long, too short? We want to hear your thoughts. This is our first one, and we're going to try to make them more appealing to the audience as we go along. So we love to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to say, Steve, go ahead.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. See you next time.
All right, we'll see you next time. Snob out.